For our rural parishes, many people struggle with the changes that will be required as part of our journey of faith. There is fear that some people will cease to practice the faith if Mass is no longer held at the churches and at the times most convenient to them. But what appears to be hardships to us seem to fall away when we compare it to what the early pioneers had to endure. In 1856, Father Jeremiah Tracy led 25 families from the Gary Owen Parish near Dubuque, Iowa, taking all that they owned in just 18 ox-drawn wagons on a month-long trip to Nebraska. While their cabins and dugouts were being built, the members of the colony lived in tents or in their covered wagons. Despite that first winter of being especially harsh, with 40 days of continuous 0 and sub-zero temperatures, as well as 4 feet of snow, the colony grew rapidly, and by 1858, there were 200 people living in the area. Father John Blaschke speaks of what it was like for pioneers who settled around Olean in about 1867. The farmers had very little or no money to bring to this country, and sometimes, yes, quite often, had to hard-earn money in the eastern states to travel to the western states to be able to establish a home here, always moving further west where they could obtain homesteads. They had to undertake work under many obstacles: no money, no foodstuffs, no house, no roads, unrecognizable land and conditions were the main difficulties that were to be overcome. With God's help, all went well. John Walker, who settled near Lindsay, describes several experiences from the pioneer years. We had plenty of ups and downs for our portion the first few years. All of my first year's hay was burned in the stack by disastrous prairie fires, something of which I knew nothing and for which I was entirely unprepared. This fire probably started hundreds of miles away and came down upon us with the speed of the wind. The cattle saved themselves by getting into the creek until the fire went by, and the family took refuge in a 40-acre field that I had plowed, and from there we witnessed one of the most terrifying sights that one can imagine. The air was filled with clouds of smoke and roaring flames as the fire swept by, and some of the children screamed in terror that the end of the world was coming. Most of the settlers still lived in caves, that is, houses made of sod and clay. It was not pleasant to have long rains weaken the walls of the sod houses until they collapsed, and all the household goods lie buried in the dirt. Or to find rattlesnakes creeping about the kitchen and sleeping rooms. Neither was it agreeable to be housed up for days at a time with very little fuel and a blizzard raging outside. Perhaps the most disheartening occurrence was the grasshopper raid of 1874. The grasshoppers came in swarms, forming clouds so thick that the light of the sun was darkened. They remained for several days, and everything that was yet green was completely devoured. Many of the settlers had relied upon the corn crop alone, and this was completely destroyed. Great suffering was the consequence. With a long winter before them, and without food, without clothing, without money, starvation and death stared many families in the face. Yet through it all, our forefathers endured, keeping their trust in God. With all the changes that we face, certainly we can choose to do the same.